Hey guys, this is John Zombro with The Lifetime Athlete and here today at the whiteboard. Today's video is going to be diving into the topic of how to identify what our strengths and weaknesses, or maybe better said, assets and liabilities are as an athlete, and how to leverage those in training to get optimal performance and or health and longevity out of our beings, our mighty human beasts. So thanks for being with me today, and we'll dive right in. I do recognize that some of the writing is small and you don't really have to memorize all of this, so thank you for bearing with me as we go through today's lesson. So when we want to identify and leverage our assets and liabilities in training, the first thing that we need to understand is the capacities of human performance, or are the capacities of human performance. And these things can be presented in any order, and they are strength, speed, power, agility, and endurance. Strength is simply force production, and typically we will look at that as a 1 RM, or 1 repetition maximum, up to perhaps 10 times. And again, that's primarily force output. Now, when we go to speed, it's velocity, and that's our maximum velocity or a relative velocity per a given distance. Power can be subdivided into anaerobic power, which is essentially force times distance divided by time, and oftentimes that's when we apply our power to an external force, such as pushing or pulling a sled, for example. Aerobic power is really our maximum oxygen uptake, or VO2 max, and that's how we harness power internally to drive our being or beast. And that can be done in running or swimming or cycling or other applications. Agility also can be broken down into a number of things that create agility. First of all, we need the mobility, the range of motion, the flexibility, the ability to move through space, and we need stability, and we need to be able to turn that on in metered or gradated fashion, in pulsatile ways in our body. So we always have mobility and stability working in harmony together when we are agile, and also we have reactivity and fluidity. So we need to be able to react to things and change and execute movement patterns efficiently. And we also need to do that with what I call supple fluidity, to be able to flow gracefully, artistically, and poetically as human movers. And when all these things come together, we indeed have agility, and it's one of the athletic expressions. Then we have endurance, and endurance can also be broken down into aerobic endurance, which really looks at the efficiency of our cardiorespiratory system to deliver oxygen, and then also muscular endurance, which allows us to express fatigue resistance. And so those are the 5 main capacities that we have in any human body, in any athletic beast, and that which we can emphasize in our training. Moving along, we have to ask ourselves, can we rate or rank our ability in those 5 characteristics or traits? And yes, we can. Very simply, if you possess a high amount of proficiency in a category, we'll give that a number 3, and we'll say that's good or even excellent performance capacity. If it's moderate, we'll give it a 2, and if you would rate yourself somewhat low, that's a 1 in any capacity, and it could also indicate poor performance or potential for that. So the challenge for the athlete is always to determine if our asset, or number 3, or high ranking capacity, best fits with the sport we are performing, or if we need to bring up a capacity to a level 3 for best outcomes in our desired sport. And at the very same time, we want to consider the balance between assets and liabilities, and also between performance and health. And so if we have some low ranking or number one capacities, which would be liabilities, are they creating a detriment to our sports performance or potentially a threat to our long-term health? And then we would need to consider that and address those things appropriately. So what I've done to try to illustrate this a bit more clearly is I've taken the 5 capacities which we've reviewed and I've listed them out in horizontal fashion in this order. Again, we could present this in any order, but today, strength, speed, power, agility, and endurance. And then what I've done is I've taken a number of different athletes in different sports and identified what their profile or ranking would be in these capacities. So first of all, when we start with a power lifter, really, it should be called a strength lifter because in the bench press, squat, and deadlift competition, we're really looking at strength. And so obviously, most power lifters, or all competitive power lifters, are going to have a 3 or high ranking in the capacity of strength. Then we'll see, just because speed and power have a strong relationship to strength, they'll typically score 2s in that area. But we'll see agility and endurance being in the ones for most power lifters. And there might be a couple of considerations to discuss here in that we don't need or want a lot of movement variability in a power lifter. We want to be very specific to the grooves or the motion patterns that they're utilizing. And stiffness, to a great extent, is of value. And also the event takes very little time, we're talking seconds, in competition. And so endurance is really not a major requirement for a power lifter. And technically, or consequently, we don't see that often being present. Now, if we look at a sprinter's going to be fairly strong. You know, how strong is strong enough is a great question we have in training, but sprinters will be typically somewhat strong, but they're going to be obviously very speed endowed, and also power, because power is a derivative of speed. We'll see some amount, but not the highest amounts of agility in our linear sprinters. And also, we don't typically see a lot of endurance because it's not a requirement of the sport. Now, moving along, when we look at football, when we look at a linebacker, this is an athlete who has to have high levels of strength, of speed, and power all together. Quite a bit of agility as well, although not quite as high as some other positions. And then again, endurance not required to any great degree because play time is 7 to 8 seconds per play in the football environment. Now we go to track and field, and we're looking at the perhaps quintessential middle distance runner. That would be the miler. And so a miler is usually going to express with strength at a 2 and speed at a 2, but their power from an aerobic perspective is going to be a 3. Don't need a lot of agility to be a miler, and endurance is typically somewhat fair, at least compared to another example which we'll look at later. Moving along, and we're getting towards the end here, the diver, most competitive divers, like springboard or platform divers, they're going to have some amount of strength and speed, but that's not really the biggest prerequisite in their sport. We're going to instead see a high amount of power and agility, also endurance being low. Now, as I move to the final example, you'll see the ultra runner or ultra distance athlete. It could be a cyclist or a skier, marathon and up, let's say. Well, typically they're going to score fairly low in strength, speed, power, and agility, but they're extremely high in endurance because that's what their sport requires. Now, when we finally get to the point that I wanted to make in this video, it's this. If you want to perform at your best in a given sport, you definitely want to have a high-ranking capacity or a 3 in those requirements that are necessary for best sports performance. But at the very same time, we have to make sure that anything that's a liability doesn't get so low that it either impairs performance, which it can do, or ultimately detracts from long-term health. And so there are no answers. There's just a lot of artistic application. But typically when we have a highly motivated and competitive and younger athlete, that's the athlete that can get away with really emphasizing the strength and de-emphasizing the weaknesses or liabilities in training. But as we move along, at least intermittently, if not permanently, we want to start shoring up our ones and getting them to twos if possible, because that's how our long-term function and health is best optimized. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It definitely gave me some food for thought in delivering it, and I hope that, again, you've got some tools that you can work with in your own training. And if you'd like to get more information on this topic or potentially work with me in a coaching capacity to achieve more of your peak performances, then check out thelifetimeathlete.com. Until next time, this is Coach JZ signing off from The Lifetime Athlete, where you can achieve peak performance at any age and become and stay hard to kill.